Hi everyone, welcome to the channel Sluggers Blue for your CAT RC preparation. In today's session, we'll be taking up the RC, an RC that was asked in your CAT exam in the year 2001. I've titled the RC as Difficulties Historians Face, 603 words just for 3 questions, so like a really lengthy RC in terms of number of words per question. And yeah, so this is, by the way, this is the first part of the session where I'll be taking you through the passage in detail by the use of a schematic. And in the second part is where we shall be discussing the questions. Okay. Now, if you have not attempted the passage yet, the link to attempt the passage is available in the description of the video. The link to watch the second part of the video, the question discussion, is also available in the description of the video, and the link to join the Telegram channel for Sluggers Blue for your CAT VRC preparation is also available in the description of the video. Okay, so let's start. Okay, now for those of you who might be watching these sessions for the first time, I'll just take you very briefly through the structure of the sessions. See, every single session caters to one RC, okay, and a session is made up of 2 parts. The first part is where I explain to you the passage in detail, paragraph by paragraph, and the second part is where I take you through the questions, where we discuss the questions. Okay, you are expected to have attempted the passage and read the passage and attempted the questions by yourselves. The link to do the same is available in the description of videos of both the parts. Okay. All right. Now, 40 such sessions make up a course that is titled as an Anthology of RCs for your reading comprehension preparation for the CAT. All right. So I hope that's clear. Let's start. Okay. Starting with the first paragraph. The difficulties historians face in establishing cause and effect relations in the history of human societies are broadly similar to the difficulties facing astronomers, climatologists, ecologists, evolutionary biologists, geologists, and paleontologists. To varying degrees, each of these fields is plagued by the impossibility of performing replicated controlled experimental interventions, the complexity arising from enormous number of variables, the resulting uniqueness of each system, the consequent impossibility of formulating universal laws, and the difficulties of predicting emergent properties and future behavior. Okay, so there's a lot of content that is packed into this with the first part of this paragraph. So let's try to break that down bit by bit and try to understand what he's trying to convey here. See guys, in the first part of the sentence, starting from the difficulties up until paleontologists, all the author has tried to say here is that the difficulties that historians, when they are studying the histories of human societies, the difficulties that they face when they are studying that related to cause and effect, these difficulties are the same type of difficulties which are faced by many other such scientific professionals like climatologists, astronomers, ecologists, etc. Okay, that's all he's trying to say in the first part. Okay, that these difficulties are very similar. These are the cause and effect type of difficulties that they all face. Okay, next, in the next sentence, then in the next part he goes on to list what these difficulties are. So he says, to varying degrees, each of these fields is plagued by the impossibility of performing replicated controlled experimental interventions. That's the first difficulty. Impossibility of performing replicated controlled experimental interventions. What does that mean? What does it mean? What do we mean when we say that? What does performing replicated controlled experimental intervention mean? Let me try to explain to you. See, uh, let's suppose you want to figure out what are the main factors which are involved in gravity. Let's say gravity. Let's say you have an experiment where there are certain effect. There's an effect that you are trying to study, and you have a potential set of causes which may have caused this effect, right? And you want to figure out which of these causes is a major cause for this effect, or which of these is a minor cause, or which of them might not be a cause at all, right? So you want to, that's the experiment you're trying to conduct. Let's suppose the effect is that of gravity between two bodies, okay? And you have made a list of causes. Let's suppose we are living in a pre-Newtonian era where Newton hadn't discovered gravity, and the apple happened to have fell upon your head, and you figured that, okay, I'm gonna do an experiment and figure out what causes gravity. Okay, and then you made a list of a hypothetical list of causes. Okay, it could be the first cause, maybe the mass of the apple, or it could be the mass of my head. It could be, let's say, the amount of light that was the amount of light that was falling in the area region where I was sitting, right? Amount of sunlight there, or it could be the time of the day. So you have a few causes, and you have the effect is like the apple falling, or gravity is the effect, right? And you want to figure out which of these is a major cause, or is the most impactful cause, or which of these is a minor cause, or which of these is not a cause at all, right? So what will you do in such a case? What will you want to do? How will you go about conducting an experiment? You'll try to set up the experiment such that only a small number of causes, or maybe just one cause, will be active. You'll try to get rid of all the other causes and check whether the effect is still true or not, right? So maybe if you might want to go into a dark room and see if the apple still falls on your head or not, right? So and if the apple still falls, if the gravity still works without any sunlight, that means that sunlight does not really have an impact on gravity, right? So it's almost like a differential analysis, like where you shut down all the other causes and let only one of the causes be active and see if the effect is still true or not. And you'll try to do that with all the other causes, right? So in the first time, only the first in the first instance only the first cause will be active, the second instance only the second cause will be active, so on and so forth. And then you'll note, let's suppose you figured out ki, okay, the only cases where the causes where the effect is still true is the second case and the first case. In that case, what you'll infer that maybe the third cause and the fourth cause were not really that don't really have an impact here. Please note, excuse that this was supposed to be, the green was supposed to be here on the fourth cause. This was supposed to be red. Okay, I'm just gonna try and correct that a little bit. Give me a second. Okay, so this is supposed to be red because in the fourth case, but you got the point, right? The point I'm trying to make here is is about differential analysis of causes. Okay, so now this is your replicate. This is so this was a case of replicated controlled experimental intervention. Let's suppose a historian wants to figure out something on these lines. Let's suppose a historian wants to figure out what were the main causes that led to the independence of India, of our country. Okay, cause one, he also has made a list of hypothetical causes. Was it the civil disobedience movement? Was it the non-violent movement? Was it the Quit India movement? Was it the what were it the sacrifices made by many patriots? What were the main causes, right? So in case of in your case, you were able to shut down some of the causes and observe the effect and check whether the effect was still true in the absence of all the other causes and in the presence of just one cause, right? The historian cannot do that. The historian does not have a time machine where he can go back and ask everyone else to, okay, let's just stick with the civil disobedience movement and let's not do anything else and let's see if we still get independence or not. Correct. So it has happened once, and it's not something that the historian has to rely on his analysis and will not be in a position where he can uh, conduct such replicable the terms used are replicated controlled experimental interventions to figure out what were the major causes of the for the independence of our country, right? So that's what the author means when he says impossibility of performing replicated controlled experimental interventions. Okay, so I hope that's clear. Let's move on to the next cause that he notes here, that now he says that the complexity arising from enormous number of variables. Okay, the complexity arising from the enormous. So the first problem was impossibility of performing replicated controlled and experimental interventions, and the second problem is even for the effect that you're trying to study, the number of causes, it's not limited. There are so many number of factors which are coming to play. So for example, for the independence of the country, you can't just say that it was just the civil disobedience movement, or it was just the Quit India movement, or it was just the sacrifices that were made by the patriots, or just Subhash Chandra Bose, or many other patriots. There must have been so many factors which went behind this whole phenomena, which led to the freedom of our country. So the number of causes is so the number of variables involved here are so many that the system becomes so complex. Okay, and resulting and the resulting unique of and every single case becomes a unique case because of the X huge number of variables involved, right? So every different case will have a different set of variables involved, and hence the resulting uniqueness of each system. And consequently, all of this leads to what? Consequently, all of this leads to the impossibility of formulating universal laws. And because of all of these problems, you won't be in a position where you can form a universal law. Okay, so whenever a country gets freedom, the main factors involved are A, B, and C, right? The laws of the three laws of freedom. No, you won't be able to, because of these problems, you won't be able to do that. And next he says, and the difficulties of predicting emergent property. Obviously, like if you have not been able to formulate laws, you also won't be able to predict any emergent properties or future behavior. Like you can predict something in the future only if you have a certain law that encapsulates the workings of the universe, right? So I can, if I drop this pen from here, I can predict that it will fall down if I let go of it, because I know the law of gravity, right? So I can predict that, okay, if I let go of this, it will fall down. But in this case, they're not able to formulate any laws, and hence they won't be able to make any predictions. Okay, that's what he means by this part. Let's read the next part now. Okay, so next the author says prediction in history, as in other historical sciences, is most feasible on large spatial scales and over long times, when the unique features of millions of small scale brief events become averaged out. Just as I could predict the sex ratio of the next 1,000 newborns, but not the sexes of my 2 children, the historian can recognize factors that made inevitable the broad outcome of the collision between American and Eurasian societies after 13,000 years of separate developments, but not the outcome of the 1960 US presidential election. So guys, see, what the author means to say here is that, what he's trying to convey here is that so far as the domain of history is concerned, predictions or the study of factors can only be made or conducted on a very large or on a very broad basis, on a large spatial and temporal scales. Spatial means in terms of space and geographies, temporal means in terms of timeline. So that means the historians are in a position where they can only make predictions or study fact or figure out what were the factors involved for certain events in the past on a very broad basis. Like he gives the example that maybe they might be in a position to figure out what were the factors that made inevitable the clash between the American and European societies after they developed separately 13,000 years, after they developed separately for around a period of 13,000 years. So they can probably predict that this was something that was definitely going to happen, right? It was inevitable. And what would that lead to? So on a large scale, they can say that, okay, that might lead to, well, millions of deaths and maybe some revolutions, etc., etc. But what they won't be able to point out is which personality might die as a result of what. So on a large scale, they might be able to, okay, that there is certain famine. If a certain famine is caused, uh, if there is a outbreak of a disease, they might be in a position where to predict that, okay, these many number of people might lose their lives, but they won't be in a position to predict that or pinpoint that for a single person, because that for a single person for a specific or pinpointed event, there'll be innumerable factors which will be involved, right? So and what happens in case of when they predict for on a broad basis is, why are they able to make predictions on a large basis? Because these innumerable minute factors on a large scale get averaged out. Okay, actually that's exactly the principle on which your insurance companies work. See, insurance companies more or less can know that for a certain population in a certain demography, what will be the mortality rates, right? That's something that is predictable, given the factors of the roads, infrastructure, the healthcare, etc. It's predictable for them to figure out the mortality rate. But what they can't predict is whether for a specific person, when the person might or might not die, right? So at a group level, at a broad level, it is easy to predict these things, but at a specific level, at a unique level, it's not possible. And the reason why it is possible to predict at a broad level, because these minute variables get averaged out. Okay, so that's the point he's trying to make, that he can predict the sex ratio of the next 1,000 newborn babies, but he cannot predict the gender of his own child that is going to be delivered. Or similarly, the historians, they were able to figure out the factors that led to the American Eurasian collision, but they also obviously would not have been in a position to predict the results of the presidential elections, because that's a very specific event, right? Next, he just says that the details of which candidate said what during a single televised debate. Now, this is an example of these micro variables, right? The details of which candidate said what during a single televised debate in October 1960 could have given the electoral victory to Nixon instead of Kennedy, right? So these micro variables end up affecting these micro effects. Okay, and there are so many of them that hence the historians cannot predict the micro effects accurately because there's so many variables. But such micro variables do not affect the larger effects. Like he notes here that, but no details of who said what could have blocked the European conquest of Native Americans, right? So these details on such a large scale would not really matter, and hence historians are better placed to predict these kind of broad scale events. Okay, so that's what he means by the first paragraph. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, next paragraph. How can students of human history profit from the experience of scientists in other historical sciences? A methodology that has proved useful involves the comparative method and so-called natural experiments. While neither astronomers studying galaxy formation nor human historians can manipulate their systems in controlled laboratory experiments, they both can take advantage of natural experiments. By comparing systems differing in the presence or absence, or in the strong or weak effect, of some putative causative factor. For example, epidemiologists forbidden to feed large amounts of salt to people experimentally have still been able to identify effects of high salt intake by comparing groups of humans who already differ greatly in their salt intake. And cultural anthropologists unable to provide human groups experimentally with varying resource abundances for many centuries still study long-term effects of resource abundance on human societies by comparing recent Polynesian populations living on islands differing naturally in resource abundance. Okay, now guys, the author, now in this case, in, up until the last paragraph, he had pointed out a problem. Okay, and now he offers a solution to the problem. He says that he first of all notes that how can students of human history profit from the experience of scientists in other historical disciplines, right? And then he cites a particular method named as titled as comparative method and natural experiment. He says a methodology that involves comparative method and so-called natural experiments. And what does this involve? He explains that, okay, maybe historians or students of human history, they can't really conduct these controlled replicable experiments by varying the causal factors by themselves. It's not in their hands. They can't do that. But what they can do is they can at least observe the systems which are already naturally present. And he gives the example of these epidemiologists who wanted to study the effect of large amount of salt on people. Now, obviously, they cannot have a group of people and have two groups of people and feed one group large amounts of salt and don't feed not feed the other group less amount of salt, because that will be ethical problems there, right? You cannot play around with the health of people just for your experiments. So they can't do that. But what they can do is they can figure out maybe a different population where natural system one, where this population already has a lot of salt in their diet, and they can try to study their effects and compare this with another population where the salt that is used in the diet is hardly anything, is not much, and then try to compare the effects of these, right? And in that manner they'll be able to understand what kind of effect consuming large amount of salt has on a person, right? So that's what he's talking about: comparative method and natural. So natural experiments is not experiments which will be conducted. Natural experiments is just that's why the author says so-called natural experiments, right? He says so-called natural experiment because the scientists are not going on to actually going to conduct these. Okay, these are experiments. These are situations or systems which are already present in the environment. The scientists just need to figure it out where they are and then study them differentially. Okay, so he gives the example of the epidemiologists, and then he gives the example of cultural and anthropologists who wanted to study long-term effects of resource abundance on human societies. Now again, they cannot have two different groups and provide over a period of 100 years and provide the first group over a period of 100 years with a lot of abundance of resources and not provide any resources to the other group and then carry on the study for 100 years, right? So rather what they did was they studied the human societies. They studied the Polynesian populations living on islands which naturally differ in the natural abundance. So there is already a group of islands available where the availability of natural resources is quite different, and hence they can study that and then figure out what kind of effect does this causative factor have, right? So that's about your second paragraph. Next para. The student of human history can draw on many more natural experiments than just comparisons among the 5 inhabited continents. Comparisons can also utilize large islands that have developed complex societies in a considerable degree of isolation, such as Japan, Madagascar, Native American, Hispaniola, New Guinea, Hawaii, and many others, as well as societies on hundreds of smaller islands and regional societies within each of these, which is within each of the continents. Natural experiments in any field, whether in ecology or human history, are inherently open to potential methodological criticisms. Those include confounding effects of natural variation in additional variables besides the one of interest, as well as problems in inferring chains of causation from observed correlations between variables. Okay, so guys, before we read the next part, let me explain the first part of this paragraph to you. See, in the very first few sentences, the author very simply notes that the student of human history doesn't just have to compare the 5 inhabited continents of the world. There's so many places which can be taken into account and studied. Like, for example, large islands that have developed complex societies in a considerable degree of isolation, so the factors of causation there will be quite different because as compared to the rest of the world, because they have developed in isolation, right? And he names a few of them. And then also societies as well as societies on hundreds of smaller islands and regional societies within each of these continents, right? So basically many options which are available to students apart from the inhabited continents, right? So large islands developed in isolation and regional societies, etc., etc., etc. After that, he goes on to acknowledge that natural experiments in any field, whether in ecology or human history, these natural experiments, this is whole methodology, in any field, they are open to potential methodological criticisms. There are some flaws which are involved here. There are some problems that do arise in these cases, right? They are open to criticism. Okay, when you deploy this method, there are some cons here involved here. Those include, and then he goes on to list two major problems with this issue, with this methodology. And the first one, he says that the first one is where he says confounding effect of non-topic variables. What does that mean? Let's suppose in case of the epidemiological study example, where the epidemiologists wanted to study the effect of huge consumption of salt on people, right? So, and then let's say they observed that the group of people that used to consume a lot of salt got really obese really fast. Then there arises a case that there might be many other variables involved in the environment, or the obesity, the case of the reason why they got obese might not necessarily be related directly to the consumption of salt. It might be because of many other factors. Maybe these were people who did not exercise so much, who were basically lazy, right? Or maybe had low basal metabolic rate, or maybe some variety of variables, right? So confounding effect of non-topic variables. The topic variable here will be intake of salt. Non-topic variable will be the other variables which cannot be controlled here, right? You have at least two separate natural environments which have allowed you to control the variable of salt intake and low salt intake. But what about the other huge number of variables which are available there, which might be affecting the effects, which might be having an effect on the effects, right, on the outcomes? So what about them? So that's the first problem. Okay. Second problem, let's suppose you observed a correlation between, okay, whenever there's an increase in salt intake, the people become more obese. That's just correlation, right? How can you see that? How can you equate correlation with causation? How can you say that the obesity is mainly due to let's say high intake in salt? Maybe there is an intermediate variable involved. Maybe the obesity is actually a result of say the increased craving of these people, which was caused by high consumption of salt. So in this case, what might be causing the obesity is not salt directly. It might in fact be the intermediate variable, which is increase in craving for junk food, right? So how can you assume that correlation is the same as causation, right? So these are the two criticisms that he points out with respect to the comparative method. The first is that of confounding effect of so many non-topic variables. Like, how do you say that it is not being caused by some other variable? Or the second is, like, how can you say that it is a case of causation and not just of correlation? right? So and then let's go to the next later part. Such methodological problems have been discussed in great detail for some of the historical sciences. In particular, epidemiology, the science of drawing inferences about human diseases by comparing groups of people, often by retrospective historical studies, has for a long time successfully employed formalized procedures for dealing with problems similar to those facing historians of human societies. Okay, after acknowledging these criticisms of this methodology, he notes that but these problems have already been faced in other fields, other historical fields like that of epidemiology, where these where the scientists already encountered these problems, and they've already set up formalized processes which can address these issues, and hence we don't need to worry. We need to be concerned about them, but hence we don't need to stop ourselves from applying this comparative method of study to our human history, right? So granted that there have been criticism, there are some disadvantages, but there also have been formalized procedures which have been set up in some other fields from which we can learn, right? So that's about this paragraph. Okay, next he says, finally in the last paragraph, in short, I acknowledge that it is much more difficult to understand human history than to understand problems in fields of science where history is unimportant and where fewer individual variables operate. Nevertheless, successful methodologies for analyzing historical problems have been worked out in several fields. As a result, the histories of dinosaurs, nebulae, and glaciers are generally acknowledged to belong to the fields of science rather than to the humanities, right? So, guys, here in this last part, the author simply, well, he's trying to sum up his argument. He's saying that, well, I totally understand, I acknowledge that it is much more difficult to understand the problems, to understand human history than to understand the problems of other fields where you can conduct experiments, where there are fewer individual variables involved, and where the history is not very important, right? So in case of gravity, for example, if you are conducting experiments on gravity, history does not, at least so far as we know, does not really play a role. You don't need to go and check, okay, gravity used to work in this manner 500 years ago and now it has changed in this manner, right? So that's what he's saying, that for so far as understanding the problems of human history is concerned, I acknowledge that yes, it is a complex issue, okay, and but then he notes that, but nevertheless, and even though it is a complex issue, yet we need to understand that successful methodologies have been worked out already in many other fields, and because of which histories of dinosaurs and nebulae and glaciers have been studied successfully, and in fact these domains are now considered within the domains of science rather than of humanities, because had they not been able to conduct proper experiments, natural experiments, not conduct experiments, like study the natural experiments and observe systematic data, if they had not been able to do that by solving these problems with the comparative method, then these would have been subjects of humanities, then these would not be considered as science, but these are considered as science, and hence that demonstrates the the strength of these formalized procedures, the acuity of these formalized procedures in terms of addressing the problems of comparative criticism. And hence, and so what he's trying to imply towards the end, he tries to imply is that it can, if it has been done for these fields of history, it can also be done for human history, okay, as well. So yeah, so that's the last paragraph. Let's very quickly sum up the flow of the argument, the flow of the ideas here in the passage, okay. He starts with noting the problem that is faced by historians, first paragraph, and he describes the problems in detail, okay. Next, he offers a solution in terms of comparative method and natural experiments for the problem, the solution which has already been deployed in many other fields of history. The field of history that the author is concerned with is, by the way, human history, okay. All right, and then the next paragraph he acknowledges that yes, there are some criticisms and there are some disadvantages and cons that relate to this comparative method, and then he also notes that but there are already formalized procedures which have been developed to address these problems, and then finally in the last part he sums up his argument that yes, studying human history might be a complex issue, but we can use the comparative method, and which has been developed in many other fields of history, and with good results, like as is exemplified in the case of studying the history of dinosaurs, nebulae, and glaciers, and hence we should deploy this in the study of human history as well. Okay, so that's your passage, guys. Okay, guys. So Central idea of the passage can be summed up in the following lines. The problem of understanding human history is more difficult and complex than understanding problems in other fields of science. However, the methodology involving comparative analysis of natural experiments can be instrumental in overcoming this hurdle. So that's your central idea. Okay, guys. So with this, we have come to the end of the session. Now, for those of you who may have not attempted the questions, you can do so by by following the link which is given in the description of the video. And the others who have not seen the other RC videos, who would like to attempt the other RCs from this course and the Anthology of RCs, you can go to the playlist of this course on the YouTube channel, YouTube channel by clicking here. It will lead you to the playlist. And yeah, so that's about the session. And if you like the video, let me know in the comments, and do subscribe to the channels. That goes blue for your CAT VRC preparation. Signing off.